What causes your canning lids to buckle, and how can you make sure that you are preventing it? So the number one cause of canning lids buckling is over tightening your band or your canning ring. So to understand how tight we should do it, we also need to talk about a little bit and understand the process that food goes through when it is being canned and why we have certain recommendations, how that affects and how that works with everything. So when you have got your food in the jar, this is already a canned jar of carrots, we've got the recommendations of headspace. Now, the reason that headspace is important is because if you are ignoring headspace, that also can cause lids to buckle, though it's a lesser cause. So when you have your canning lid, you're going to put your prepared contents, following, of course, tested as well, but a tested and safe approved method of canning. You're going to do it to the headspace that's indicated for the recipe. And that's going to vary anywhere from 1/4 inch for certain jams and jellies to 1/2 inch to 1 inch, etc., based upon the food type. Then you're going to be placing your lid, wiping the rim down with a damp paper towel to ensure that there's no particles that are left on the rim that could inhibit this from sealing during the process. So we then put our lid on. So obviously when this is going into the canner, if it's a water bath, you're not having boiling water that's getting in or within the steam canner, and then or pressure canner under steam. And then we need to put our band on. However, if you tighten this too much, you actually inhibit the exhausting from happening, and that is critical in getting a seal. So as your food is being processed and it has heat, it needs to exhaust the oxygen that is inside the jar, which is going to be in there no matter what you do in the beginning process. So it's key that you don't have this tightened down so tight that it can't exhaust out the oxygen while it's being processed. But of course, you have to have the band on there or it's just going to fall off and then nothing is going to seal. So that's why we have the recommendations of doing it fingertip tight. But what does fingertip tight actually mean when you're putting on your canning band or canning ring? So you're first going to make sure you've got your lid on the jar. We've already prepped it. There's nothing to inhibit our seal, and we're going to put that on in the center. Then it's recommended if you use just your thumb and 2 fingers, so 3 fingers so that you don't over tighten it. And you're going to put your band on, and you're going to do it just until you meet resistance. Then you're going to do it 1/4 more turn. There we go. Now that is what's considered fingertip tight, because if you just leave it to the point where you have just met resistance, that's actually going to be too loose, and sometimes your band will loosen a lot during the processing and it's not going to be on there tight enough. And I've actually had very few instances, but where I've seen that people didn't tighten it enough, and when they pulled the lid off of their canner at the end of the processing time, the bands had actually worked themselves loose and off, and the lids were floating, and of course all of the food was ruined because it had come out of the jar and water had filled in when they were water bath canning. But the other problem is if you over tighten that and you go past the point of just meeting resistance, 1/4 more turn. If you go past that point and you really crank it down hard and really are tightening it as tight as you can get it, then it can't exhaust and you end up having that lid buckling, where you'll actually see that the lid will seal in most cases, but it will have buckled or be wrinkled and puckered up in spots, and it's not just nice and smooth like this is and just sucked down tight to the jar. Now, if you do experience lid buckling, is the food still safe to eat? Well, in most cases, it will actually seal, but it's not something that you should put on the shelf. It's something that should go in the freezer for long term or put it in the fridge and consume it within the next couple of days. It's not an instance where you're going to put it on the shelf and come to it months or a year down the road and trust it with that lid buckling. Now, very rarely you can have lids that will buckle even if you didn't do it to fingertip tight, if you didn't do it to the proper headspace. That can cause an issue. And sometimes it can be faulty lids. So I've actually seen where people have bought lids off of Amazon from like a generic company or non-brand name specific lids, and they've had every single lid or almost every lid actually buckle on them and fail. And they were doing it to the correct fingertip tight. They were following correct headspace, etc. But it was because of faulty lids, basically, that were not manufactured well and correctly. So a lot of people will recommend using ball or cur lids. Those are fine as well. But there are some good lids out there as well that aren't necessarily just ball and cur. So a few that I have used and I have not had any issues with, they've all sealed well for me, no lid buckling issues, has been 4 Jars, Denali, as well as the Superb lid. So that's what you actually see here right now. And using that 3-finger method so that you don't accidentally over tighten when you're using all of your fingers. The 3-finger method is actually one that Superb recommends to help ensure that you're not over tightening the lids too tight. If you want to learn more about canning, make sure that you check out my playlist on preserving foods. There is a ton of step-by-step tutorial and recipe videos there for you.